Martha Ellison stood outside her former office, staring at the door like a stranger in her own life. Her nameplate, 40 years of dedication etched into brass, was already gone. They didn't retire her. They erased her. 3 days ago, she'd received a calendar invite titled Leadership Transition Luncheon. That was the first red flag. No one transitions leadership 2 years before planned retirement. But she'd gone, out of habit, out of pride. Brent Callahan, the new CEO with cufflinks more expensive than her car, had handed her a bouquet and a crystal plaque. "For your many years of service," he said, eyes flat as glass. "Time to enjoy the next chapter." Applause. Cake. Posed photos. And underneath it all, silence. No warning. No discussion. No exit plan. Just a cardboard box and a quiet escort out the side door before the afternoon shift change. Martha hadn't cried. Not then. Not in the car. Not even when she stood in her apartment later that night, holding the plaque like a tombstone. It wasn't just a job they took from her. It was her rhythm. Her place. Her name. She spent the next week in silence, waking at 5:30 like she always had, only to sit at the kitchen table until noon. Her phone stayed quiet, except for junk mail and discount offers for early bird cruises. Until Saturday, 8:07 p.m. A message appeared from Kendra Morales, one of the last people at the hospital she still trusted. Young, sharp, loyal. A sponge for rules. A heart for patience. Need to talk. Something's not right with billing. I didn't know who else to tell. Martha read it 3 times, fingers cold against the ceramic mug. She hadn't thought about compliance codes in a week. But now her mind clicked back into gear with terrifying speed. Billing? Something wasn't right? She replied quickly. Call me. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Personal phone. The call came right on time. Kendra's voice was low, rushed. I don't have long. They've been reviewing claims. I noticed a few weird entries, PT sessions, treatments, even some overnight stays. But the patients were either discharged already or never admitted in the first place. Martha stayed quiet, letting her speak. I flagged them in the system, Kendra continued. Rick from finance told me to delete the reports. Said compliance already reviewed everything, but that can't be true. You were the only one who had final review authority. I was, Martha said evenly. Until I wasn't. Kendra exhaled. I think they pushed you out because you'd catch it. You always caught it. A beat passed. Then Martha asked, did you keep copies? Yes. On a flash drive. Hidden. But I don't know what to do. Send them to me. I'll take it from here. After they hung up, Martha didn't move for a long time. Then she rose, opened her file cabinet, and pulled out an old compliance binder, still labeled with tabs from 2018. Medicare billing codes, audit thresholds, common red flags. Her fingers knew exactly where to turn. The rhythm returned, slow but steady. By noon, Kendra's files had arrived. Martha opened them and began to read. Code after code. Treatment after treatment. Name she recognized, Mr. Alberts, who came in twice a month for blood work. Ms. Perez, who'd had a knee replacement last year. All billed for procedures that never happened. Sessions that no one documented. Thousands of dollars routed through the system like water through a cracked pipe. Martha didn't need more than 10 minutes to see the pattern. This wasn't clerical error. It was fraud. Deliberate. Systemic. Clever enough to stay under automatic audit triggers, but not clever enough to avoid someone like her, someone who knew where the pressure points were. Someone they had conveniently removed. She stepped away from the computer, heart pounding, breath shallow. The betrayal landed heavier than before. She had trained half the billing staff herself. She had written the protocols now being manipulated. They hadn't just forced her out. They had done it so she wouldn't be there to stop this. At 3:43 p.m., she pulled up a secure email service she hadn't used since a CMS training in DC years ago. Created a new address. Anonymized. Clean. And then she began drafting a message. I believe I have information regarding fraudulent billing practices involving Medicare reimbursements at Saint Isabel Medical Center. I am not a current employee. I wish to remain anonymous for now. Attached are redacted examples of claims that appear fabricated or manipulated. She didn't sign her name. She didn't have to. That evening, the sky turned amber over Glenwood Springs. Martha sat on her balcony, looking out at the slow movement of the river below. No one knew what she was doing. No one had asked her to do it. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something solid return to her spine. A memory, sharp and vivid. A patient once held her hand after a difficult discharge and whispered, "You're the only one in this place who sees us." She had seen them then. And she would see them now. Her phone buzzed. Another message from Kendra. "Martha. I just checked one of the files again. Your name's still on the compliance sign-off. They didn't even bother to remove it. If this blows up, they might say you approved it." Martha froze. Her signature. Still attached. Not only had they erased her, they were trying to frame her. And suddenly, this wasn't just about protecting patients anymore. This was personal. Martha's hands clenched around her phone. The weight of Kendra's message settled in her stomach like a stone. Her signature was still on the compliance records. They hadn't just erased her. They had left her name as a shield to take the fall if this fraud unraveled. She forced herself to take a slow, steady breath. Panic wouldn't serve her now. Not when she was the only one who could stop this. She picked up a pen and started listing names. Who else had access to these records? Who would know she wasn't involved? And who had the most to lose if the truth came out? At the top of that list was Brent Callahan. She hadn't trusted him from the moment he walked into Saint Isabel. He wasn't from healthcare, he was from finance. A numbers man, a cost-cutting evangelist. The kind who saw patients as data points and ethics as an obstacle. Now, it was clear. He hadn't just been trimming excess. He'd been building a machine, one that turned routine Medicare claims into a multimillion-dollar siphoning operation. And he'd made one critical mistake. He underestimated the woman he tried to erase. Martha opened her laptop and began combing through Kendra's files. The fraud was structured, precise. Claims inflated just below audit thresholds. Patients billed for tests they never received, stays they never had. Everything carefully orchestrated. But one name appeared over and over in the approval logs. Richard Rick Albright. Senior Revenue Integrity Analyst. She knew him. A smug, middle management type who spent more time managing spreadsheets than people. He wouldn't have set this up himself. But he was executing it. And that made him the weakest link. Martha picked up her phone and dialed Kendra. "Kendra, I need you to confirm something for me," she said. "Is Rick still showing up to work like nothing's wrong?" A pause. Then, "Yeah. But he's been acting off. More closed-door meetings with Brent. I think they're scared." "Keep your head down," Martha said. "But if you hear anything, about them trying to shift blame, let me know immediately." She hung up and opened a new browser window. It was time to get outside help. Dana Wu's name had been circulating in healthcare watchdog circles for years. She was relentless, an investigative journalist who had brought down private hospitals, for-profit hospice scams, even a senator once. Martha had never spoken to her. But she knew the kind of work she did. And if she wanted this to end the right way, not buried under internal HR meetings or quiet settlements, she needed someone like Dana. She drafted the email carefully. Subject: Whistleblower Information, Saint Isabel Medical Center. Ms. Wu. I have evidence of fraudulent Medicare billing practices at Saint Isabel Medical Center. This includes fabricated patient treatments, falsified compliance signatures, and systemic financial mismanagement involving senior executives. I have attached redacted examples for verification. If you are interested in learning more, I am willing to speak under agreed protections. I ask for complete anonymity. But I do not ask for silence. A former administrator. She attached the files, took a breath, and hit send. 30 minutes later, a reply. This is serious. I want to meet. Safe location. Name the time. The next morning, Martha arrived early at the diner off I-70, choosing a booth in the back where she could see the door. She had been careful, no phone calls, no credit card transactions, nothing traceable. Dana arrived 5 minutes later, a worn leather notebook in one hand, a black coffee in the other. No recorder. No pretense. Just sharp eyes and a quiet nod as she slid into the seat across from Martha. You know this makes you a target, Dana said without introduction. I know, Martha replied evenly. Dana flipped through the pages of redacted records, scanning notes, circling numbers. After 10 minutes, she looked up. This isn't just fraud. This is federal indictment-level fraud. Martha nodded. And they're trying to pin it on me. Dana exhaled through her nose. Who's at the top? Brent Callahan. Dana smirked. Figured. Men like him always think they're too smart to get caught. She tapped the file. I can start digging, financial records, past audits, executive decisions. But you have to be sure you're ready for what comes next. Martha didn't hesitate. I don't need credit. I just need this to end. Dana studied her for a moment, then slid a burner phone across the table. This is how we'll talk. No personal devices. No traceable calls. Then she stood, nodding once. I'll be in touch. Martha watched her leave, then finished her coffee in silence. The wheels were turning now. And there was no stopping them. That night, Martha's phone buzzed with a message from Kendra. Martha, something's happening. They just pulled Rick into an emergency meeting. He looked pale. Martha frowned. Then another message. I heard something else. Brent is asking for records. Old ones. Compliance logs. I think he's trying to see who has what. Her jaw tightened. They knew. They didn't know who yet. But they knew someone was pulling threads. Martha moved quickly. She disconnected her Wi-Fi, powered down her laptop, and retrieved the encrypted flash drive she had prepared. If they were going to start covering their tracks, she needed to be 2 steps ahead. Then, at 11:04 p.m., she got a final message from Kendra. One that made her breath catch in her throat. I don't know if I should tell you this, but Brent asked HR for something today. Your personnel file. Martha felt her heart thud hard in her chest. She typed one response. What exactly was he looking for? Kendra replied almost instantly. Your retirement agreement. A cold realization settled in Martha's bones. He wasn't just worried about the fraud. He was looking for leverage. And if he couldn't find any, he would manufacture it. Martha sat in the dim glow of her kitchen, staring at the message from Kendra. Her retirement agreement. Brent wasn't just looking to cover up fraud, he was trying to twist the narrative, to bury the truth beneath a manufactured scandal. She had seen it before. High-level executives rarely admitted wrongdoing. Instead, they turned whistleblowers into disgruntled former employees, bitter about losing power. They reshaped the story until the real villain became the person who dared to speak up. But Martha wasn't just any former employee. She knew the system better than they did. Her next move had to be careful, precise. If Brent was digging for leverage, it meant he wasn't sure what she had. And that uncertainty was her greatest weapon. She pulled out her burner phone and dialed Dana. The journalist answered on the first ring. I was expecting your call, Dana said. Let me guess, Brent's making moves. He's trying to control the narrative before it even starts, Martha replied. He requested my retirement agreement. Dana was silent for a moment. Then, that means they're preparing a counterattack. If they can't discredit the evidence, they'll discredit you. I need to be ahead of this, Martha said. Then we go public, Dana replied. No half measures. We hit them first. Martha hesitated. Once her name was out there was no turning back. No quiet life. No anonymity. But if she waited too long, they would paint her as a liar before she had the chance to tell the truth. Her voice was steady when she answered. Do it. The next morning, Martha woke to an email. Dana had worked fast. Exclusive report, former hospital administrator accuses Saint Isabel Medical Center of systemic Medicare fraud. Martha's name was in the opening line. The article was airtight. It laid out the case in black and white, backing every claim with documents. Kendra had also agreed to speak, anonymously. Between the two of them, they had built a case no PR firm could spin away. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Saint Isabel released a statement. It was exactly what Martha had expected. These allegations are deeply concerning. We take compliance seriously and are launching an internal review. Ms. Ellison's recent claims will be evaluated in context with her departure from the hospital. They didn't outright deny it. That meant they were buying time, scrambling to contain the damage. Then the real blow came. By noon, the state's Office of Inspector General announced a formal investigation. By evening, CMS had suspended all Medicare reimbursements to the hospital pending an audit. Martha sat in her apartment, watching the story unfold in real time. Kendra called first. They're panicking, she said. Brent pulled the entire executive team into a closed-door meeting. No one knows what's going on, but people are scared. Good, Martha said simply. Then, a second call. Dana again. You have them against the ropes, Dana said. They're trying to limit press access. I'm hearing whispers that some of the senior finance team is considering turning on Brent to protect themselves. Martha closed her eyes, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then, another call. This one from an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A cold, familiar voice filled the line. You really should have taken the retirement, Martha. Brent. Her grip tightened around the phone. I did take it, Brent. And yet, here we are. There was a pause. Then, a quiet chuckle. You think you've won? I think you should call your lawyer, she said. Silence. Then, the line went dead. Martha placed the phone down carefully. Brent wasn't the type to go down without a fight. But she wasn't the type to let people like him win. For the first time since this all began, she allowed herself to smile. The battle wasn't over. But the tide had turned. Martha had expected Brent to retaliate. She just hadn't expected it to happen so fast. The morning after Dana's article went live, the hospital released a second statement. This time, the tone was sharper. Ms. Ellison's allegations are being reviewed, however, her past role in compliance oversight raises important questions about her own accountability in these matters. We urge the public to reserve judgment until the investigation is complete. It was the move of a desperate man. If they couldn't silence her, they would try to smear her. Her phone buzzed again. Kendra. You saw it? Kendra asked, her voice tight. I saw it, Martha said calmly. They're trying to pin this on you, Kendra continued. Brent's making it sound like you were part of the fraud all along. Martha wasn't surprised. The best way to neutralize a whistleblower was to make them look guilty. It was predictable. It was textbook. And it meant he was running out of options. She heard a muffled sound on the other end of the line. Kendra lowered her voice. Martha. Rick just disappeared. Martha's grip on the phone tightened. What do you mean disappeared? He took an emergency leave. No one knows where he is. Word is, Brent told him to keep his mouth shut or take the fall. Martha exhaled slowly. Rick had always been the weak link. He wasn't built for a scandal of this magnitude. If Brent was trying to push him into silence, then Rick had two choices: run or flip. Her laptop dinged with an incoming email. Anonymous sender. Subject: we need to talk. She clicked it open. I know what Brent is doing. I don't want to go down for this. I have documents. If you help me, I'll help you. It wasn't signed. But it didn't have to be. Rick was ready to turn. Martha typed back a single line. Where and when? The reply came instantly. Midnight. Storage Unit 317, Eastwood Facility. Come alone. Martha sat back, tapping her fingers against the desk. Meeting in the middle of the night? It was risky. But Rick had information that could end this. And she was tired of waiting. That night, she parked outside the storage facility, engine idling as she scanned the rows of units. The place was quiet, too quiet. She stepped out, pulling her coat tighter against the cold, and walked toward Unit 317. The door was already cracked open. Inside, Rick stood hunched over a stack of files, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. Sweat lined his forehead despite the cold. He turned sharply as she stepped inside. You alone? He asked. You think I brought the press? Martha shot back. Rick swallowed hard, running a hand through his thinning hair. I screwed up, he muttered. I thought Brent had this under control. I thought it was just optimizing revenue. Martha folded her arms. And now? Rick exhaled shakily. Now I know I'm a scapegoat. He slid a thick folder across the metal table. Martha flipped it open. What she saw made her pulse spike. Internal emails. Directives from Brent. Billing instructions that explicitly outlined how to manipulate Medicare codes without triggering audits. Brent's name was all over it. Martha looked up. If you have this, why not go to the authorities yourself? Rick laughed dryly. Because I need protection. If I go public, Brent will make sure I never work in this industry again. Martha closed the folder. So you want me to do it? Rick nodded. You're already in the fire. If this comes from you, it'll stick. Martha studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up the folder. If I do this, you testify when the time comes, she said. Rick hesitated. But then he nodded. Yeah. I will. Martha turned and walked toward the door. But just as she stepped outside, Rick called after her. There's one more thing. She stopped. The board, he said. They've been backing Brent this whole time. But if this gets bad enough, they'll cut him loose. Martha processed that quickly. If she applied pressure in the right places, Brent wouldn't just be fired. He'd be sacrificed. And that was exactly what she needed. As she drove home, the weight of the folder pressed against her lap. This was it. Brent was out of moves. And tomorrow, she would make sure the world knew it. The morning after Martha's meeting with Rick, the final blow began to fall. Dana published a follow-up article. Exclusive, internal documents reveal direct evidence of fraud at Saint Isabel Medical Center. The story contained everything. Leaked emails. Direct orders from Brent Callahan. Financial records showing how manipulated claims funneled millions of taxpayer dollars into hidden corporate accounts. Rick had given Martha the smoking gun. And now, it was public. The reaction was immediate. By noon, St. Isabel's board of directors issued a statement. In light of new information, Brent Callahan has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. By 3 p.m., news crews had gathered outside the hospital. By 6 p.m., federal investigators arrived. By 9 p.m., Brent Callahan was arrested for Medicare fraud. Martha sat in her apartment, watching the live footage of him being escorted into a black government SUV. He didn't shout. didn't resist. He just stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, as reporters hurled questions he couldn't answer. Her phone buzzed. It was Kendra. "He's gone," she said, voice shaking with something between relief and disbelief. "Brent's gone." Martha exhaled, pressing her fingers against her forehead. She had known this was coming. But hearing the words out loud made it real. "There's talk of cleaning house," Kendra continued. "The board is scrambling. They want to settle." Quietly. Martha smiled faintly. "Of course they do." Kendra hesitated. Then, softly, "You did it, Martha." Martha closed her eyes. She had exposed the fraud. Protected the patients. Made sure the system corrected itself, at least for now. But she didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, there was no victory parade. No grand applause. Just a quiet, tired satisfaction. And maybe, that was enough. 2 months later, she stood at the front of a small classroom at the community college, looking out at the next generation of healthcare professionals. "These are the rules," she said, tapping the thick compliance manual in front of her. "But rules only work if people follow them. If you see something wrong, you have two choices: look away, or do something." A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "But what if speaking up costs you everything?" Martha met her gaze. "Then you ask yourself, if you stay silent, can you live with that?" The room was quiet. Then, one by one, they nodded. Martha stepped back, watching them absorb the lesson. She had spent 40 years protecting people inside the system. Now, she was doing something bigger. She was making sure the next generation knew how to fight back. 1 year later, no one at Saint Isabel spoke Brent Callahan's name aloud. The hospital had changed, not overnight, not in every way, but enough. The board had been replaced. New compliance policies were implemented. Quarterly audits became mandatory. The staff turnover was high, but those who remained knew one thing for certain: what happened under Brent would never happen again. His trial had been swift. With Rick's testimony and the mountain of evidence against him, there was little room for argument. Brent Callahan was sentenced to 9 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. But Martha didn't follow the trial. She had already moved on. Her name had never been in the official reports. She had never sought the spotlight. But in certain circles, healthcare compliance networks, whistleblower advocacy groups, she had become something of a legend. Not that she cared. She was far more interested in the stack of essays sitting in front of her, written by the students in her healthcare ethics course. One paper caught her eye. The title read, "The System Only Works If We Make It Work." Martha smiled. She turned the page and began reading. One evening, months later, she sat on her front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft golds and blues. A familiar voice interrupted the quiet. "Martha?" She turned and saw Kendra standing at the edge of her driveway, a nervous smile on her face. "I was in the area," Kendra said, stepping closer. "Thought I'd stop by." Martha gestured toward the empty chair beside her. "You're always welcome." Kendra sat, exhaling deeply. "The hospital is different now," she said. "Not perfect. But better." Martha nodded, waiting. Kendra hesitated, then turned to her. "Do you regret it? Any of it?" Martha thought for a long moment. "I regret that it had to happen," she admitted. "I regret that people like Brent exist. That the system makes it so easy for them to thrive." Then she met Kendra's gaze. "But do I regret what I did?" A quiet smile. "Not for a second." Kendra exhaled, nodding slowly. I want to do more," she admitted. "Go beyond patient care. Maybe policy work. Maybe something bigger." Martha studied her, then reached over and gave her hand a firm squeeze. "You already have." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars emerge one by one. Martha closed her eyes, letting the night settle around her. She had spent a lifetime fighting to keep the system honest. And now, she was watching a new generation step forward, ready to do the same. That, she thought, was the best kind of justice. The kind that lasted.